You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series Doctor Who. And today we're discussing the first Doctor story, Galaxy 4. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
How's it going?
Folks, be sure to like The Secrets of Doctor Who on Facebook, where we're at facebook.com/Secrets of Doctor Who. You can retweet us on Twitter, where we're at SQPN, and we love to hear from you wherever you find us on social media. There's another show on the StarQuest Network you are sure to enjoy called The Catholics of Oz. You can find that wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/Oz, O-Z. So, we're talking about this first Doctor story, called Galaxy 4, and Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens?
This week, the first Doctor, Stephen and Vicky, land on an unknown, uninhabited planet in the apparent future. The uninhabited planet has recently suffered 2 crashes from spaceships. One was from the Drahven race, which is female-dominated, and one is from the Rills, an ammonia-breathing, non-humanoid race that can't go out in an oxygen atmosphere, so they use Roomba vacuum-cleaning robots that Vicky calls Chumblies as drones. But there's a problem, because the planet is going to explode in a couple of days, and the Drahven spaceship doesn't work, so the Drahvens can't leave. The Rills are repairing their own spaceship, and they have offered to take the Drahvens with them. But the warlike Drahvens want to kill the Rills and take their spaceship. The Drahvens try to use the Doctor, Stephen, and Vicky as pawns to achieve their murderous goals, but the Doctor ends up using the TARDIS to give the Rills ship the power to take off. He jumpstarts it, and he leaves the Drahvens stranded on the planet so that they die when it explodes. The end.
So let's start with just our first impressions. Father Cory, what's your first impression of this one?
It was a kind of an interesting one. There's a lot of the back and forth. You know, unfortunately, Classic Who, because they have so much time to fill, they like to do the back and forth between the 2 locations or 3 locations. But I thought it was interestingly done. The idea of the Drahvens being female dominated, but then their soldiers are basically cloned or genetically created or robots or whatever they're supposed to be. I don't know if it was clear
Clones.
to me what they were,
Or at least test tube babies.
Yeah,
Right.
So, I mean, that was kind of an interesting idea. And then, of course, you got the Rills, where these were non-humanoid aliens. And so I thought it was a enjoyable episode. And this is one that has been recreated in animation. The animation was okay. I'm not the biggest fan of the animation in general that they've been doing with Doctor Who, but this one wasn't too bad.
Jimmy?
Yeah, I agree. I watched the animated version. Specifically, I watched the color animated version because they came out with both a color and a black and white version. And the color one was very colorful. And we can talk more about the animation, but it was a nice, straightforward, simple plot. It had a lot of visual storytelling. One of the things that was true of the animation they did for this one is that it was relatively untethered in that they didn't have telesnaps to work from. So there were a few production stills that they could use as references for, okay, this is what a Drahven looks like. But they didn't have scene by scene, moment by moment guides for what they were doing. So they had to visualize what was happening. And they did it very impressively. I noted multiple instances where there was just a little noise on the soundtrack. And the soundtracks were recorded by fans at home on primitive audio recorders. But there would be a little sound on the soundtrack, and they would come up with an image that represented that. You know, so like if you hear this kind of grunt, oh, Stephen is moving at this moment. And so they, in their untetheredness from a visual set of references, they were able to come up with some very interesting visuals. Like the sky on the planet was this red sky with all of these stars and 3 suns, and it was dramatic to look at. But they also were able to bring a sense of scale that wouldn't have been there in the original show. Like in episode 4, there's a scene where the Drahvens are shooting at the Chumblies down in a canyon. And this is like, they never had that much space on a BBC soundstage. So this is a much more long distance dramatic presentation of this firefight. And it was well done. I enjoyed it. It was like I said, simple, straightforward plot. And interestingly, I read that the actors really hated this script. And I'm not sure why, because I enjoyed the story. I certainly enjoyed it more than some stories. Apparently, William Hartnell's reaction to the script was so negative that they threatened to fire him, which they didn't. But the actress who plays Vicky, Maureen O'Brien, her reaction to the script was so negative, they actually did fire her. They let her go the next story, The Mythmakers, is her last story. But I thought it was an enjoyable story.
It's interesting. I heard that Peter Purvis's, who plays Stephen, his complaint was that the story was originally written for Vicky, Barbara, and Ian, and Stephen got all of Barbara's lines, which he felt like feminized his responses to a lot of things. Which I was watching it with that eye toward that, and I didn't really notice that, but.
Yeah, I didn't either. It would have been fascinating to see Barbara trapped in an airlock, but
right,
yeah,
with a gun. But
one thing we should probably discuss is the gender of the Drahvens, because they're all female, and that was not the case in the original script. In the original script, they were male characters, and people could look at this. Oh, we've got this warlike feminine race. Is this some kind of 1960s male chauvinism? Is this some kind of negative comment about women or the so-called battle of the sexes or things like that? And actually, in the original script, the Drahvens were men, and it was Verity Lambert, the female producer of Doctor Who changed them to women. And I think that's fine. It's just another way of showing they're not humans. They're aliens. They have this unusual culture. They're very warlike. They're also female-dominated, so they're like Amazons. And their culture is pretty creepy. They have an elite that is normally born, and then they have a slave class that is, they're described as created in test tubes. They look like clones in the video version, but if you look at the production stills from the original broadcast version, it's clear that the slave Drahvens are not all copies of each other. They're played by 3 different women who are not triplets. And so it looks like they're really test tube babies. But the test tube babies have limited intelligence that's deliberately limited to make them compliant. And so it's kind of like Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, where you have different grades of human beings. But the elite class, to which the leader Maga belongs, is normal born. They get to eat what for them is normal food, even though for us it's just leaves. And they are all female. There are very few males in Drahvan society. They have a few males to service the elite class for breeding purposes. But other than that, they kill all the males because they just consume resources. So, wow, this is a very creepy culture. And I kind of admire Verity Lambert saying there's no reason these people can't be female. Let's make them female. Because normally you would expect the opposite, and this makes it different. It brings to mind a first season of Star Trek Next Generation episode, which is widely regarded as one of the worst in the series. The episode is called Code of Honor. I forget what production number it was. It's like the 3rd episode, maybe 4th of Next Generation. And they go to this planet that is all black people. And I don't mind the fact that they're all black people, because I've seen plenty of planets where it's all white people. There can be a planet where it's all black people or all Asian people or all blue people. Not every race and not every culture is going to have the mixing of different skin tones that we have here in America or in Britain or wherever. And so it doesn't bug me that they, look different. What's the real problem is not simply that they're black people, but they're black people at the center of a terrible episode. It's the one where you shall have no Lieutenant Yar and no vaccine. And it's just a terrible, terrible episode that also is playing out Gene Roddenberry's women fighting women sexual fantasies. And it comes across as if it's a racist statement, but I don't think it had to be. It's just that if you combine all black culture with terrible, ridiculous culture in a terrible episode, it comes across very negatively.
I thought you were going to say Angel One, it reminded you of, because that was the one with the matriarchal society. Yeah.
That's the matriarchal society, yeah, and that's also a terrible episode. Yeah. But it's not that it's a matriarchal society that bugs me. It's the fact it's a terrible episode.
Right.
I also point out that Code of Honor was remade by the same writer as Emancipation on Stargate, and is just as awful. Going back to the production of this episode, especially of the animation, they did have more than telesnaps because in 2011, the third episode was recovered completely.
That's true.
So you can see, and actually you can go online if you don't have the DVDs, you can go online and you can see the original episode and what the sets looked like originally. And let's just say the real ship didn't look quite as impressive in the original, because it basically looked like a bunch of plastic sheets hung from like tent poles, but no, they did an incredible job with the animation on this, and it really does look good, very colorful, very interesting things that they could do with it. And admittedly, I know and by the way, one thing I was going to mention too is that part of the team that worked on this was Big Finish. They have a creative wing that works on stuff like animation as well as their audio dramas that we know them for. So that was kind of an interesting connection too. And going to the culture of the Drahvens, that's of course, there's plenty of stories about, population control and things like that. And I agree, that's a very interesting take on that, where instead of the women being the one controlled, we can think of some Asian cultures where boys are more highly prized, and so there are things like gender selection and stuff like that in their cultures against girls. To kind of flip that on the head is kind of an interesting way to look at it. I don't know if that was in Verity Lambert's mind at the time, because I don't know if that was quite as well known in the West at that time. Could be.
Yeah, we should be clear, by gender selection, we're referring to they abort female unborn children.
I was trying to be a little more delicate about it, but yes.
Yeah.
But yes, that is exactly what happens. I don't know if that was in her mindset at the time, but it is something that's a good, if will, message for even today, where that is a real concern in several cultures, that girls are aborted just because they're girls. And now they're having population issues of the opposite way. They're starting to lose population because they don't have enough of pairs to increase the population.
This is particularly an issue in China, where they had a one-child policy, and in a culture that disfavors females, if you're going to have one child, you want it to be a boy, so they would abort any girls. And it has, the one-child policy itself is stupid, and they're reaping the price of that now. Peter Zion, among others, has some really good videos explaining the Chinese demographic crisis and how it's civilization ending in terms of where China is going to be in just a few years. It's not going to be the same China. They're rapidly falling from their status as a world power. But it's especially problematic if you have a one-child policy and you've got a society that's going to then imbalance the ratio of the genders as a result of that policy.
So as far as my first impression goes, having not seen this before, so
what did you think of it, Dom?
Yeah.
So I thought it was too long. I thought it was a decent story, and it had a classic sci-fi theme to it, which was don't judge a book by its cover. You had the attractive Drahvens who were very aggressive and warlike and merciless and lacking in ideas of even love or charity or anything like that. And then you had the Rills who were ugly and scary and yet were peaceful to a fault, to the self-sacrificing level, and willing to extend the benefit of the doubt over and over and over again to the Drahvens, who only gave them back, pain and aggression. And so that's a classic sci-fi sort of turn your expectations on their head. I like that, but like a lot of the classic Who, it was just went on too long. They had four episodes to fill, and they filled them, and when it could have really been, a 2-episode story, maybe 3. So, there was like I think one of you mentioned, or both of you, there was a lot of running back and forth and going, here, going here, going there, going here, going there, and that just seemed a little unnecessary. But it's of the time. It's the very typical of the time.
It didn't bother me as much in this story as it does in some.
Yeah.
It seemed like there was more purposefulness to why they're going to these different places and interacting with them. They're not, what we didn't have is running, of just fleeing from one location to another.
Right.
There was a purpose. It's like, okay, we're going to go here now to do this thing, and they would do it. So I thought that was a little better. I also liked, as you said, Dom, the Rills and how they're like reasonable to a fault. I like just how reasonable they were in their dialogue, because Vicky or Steven or the Doctor would challenge them on some point, and they would be like, like, why would you help the Drahvens? It's like, well, why shouldn't we? And they were just eminently reasonable.
Yeah, and I liked Vicky in this. I mean, she was capable, and she wasn't like Susan and Victoria, who comes later. I know are often sort of damsel in distress, whereas Barbara very often felt in control and had her own agency. And I think Vicky feels the same way. Even though she's young, she felt like she was an equal member of this trio of the Doctor and Steven and her. So I really liked her character in this. I thought it was good, and she would stand up for herself at times. I mean, there was a few screechy, scary Rill sort of moments, but nothing unexpected. And she gets to name the Chumbleys, which the Rills accept.
The Rills are eminently reasonable. Oh, you call them Chumbleys. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and we're not talking about the guy from Pawn Star.
Yeah, Chumbly on Pawn Stars, right? That's what I was trying to remember. I was thinking of like Winnie the Pooh. I've got Rumblies and my Chumbleys. Yeah. So we mentioned that this was one of the earliest episodes stories that was missing many episodes, and all of them until 2011, as you mentioned. The animated version was released in 2021, so it's relatively new animation. This story is the first story of the 3rd season, so this is where really kind of getting in, and where this is the first Doctor's last season. We're at the right. Is that the last?
Kind of in the middle of it, isn't it? That he.
Yeah. Right. So I wonder, Jimmy, you mentioned that they were looking at maybe firing Hartnell. I wonder if that had a cause of that.
It could have been easily one of the things that led to that conclusion, because his relationship with the producers was becoming increasingly tense, and they were looking to write him out and try to figure, how do we save the show at the same time, which led to the casting of Patrick Troughton in the first regeneration. There are a couple of near misses. There's an upcoming storyline called The Celestial Toymaker, where the Celestial Toymaker basically vanishes the first Doctor for an episode, and they seriously thought about, when he unvanishes, he's a different guy. So they almost recast him in that story, but they kept him around for a little longer until the 10th planet.
Interesting. Yeah.
And that kind of explains why when, of course, he was, William Hartnell was having health issues that was affecting his ability to act. And so when they finally did get to the point that they decided to regenerate, that it kind of explains why it's kind of like, oh wait, please don't go, sarcastic.
Right.
We'll write you out nicely, and we'll figure this out.
Yeah.
Yes,
They don't make him disappear off screen. Sixth Doctor. So the story itself, they end up on this planet in Galaxy 4, which I'm not sure how many there are.
No, I don't know that it's in Galaxy 4. The Drahvens say we're from the planet Drahva in Galaxy 4.
Oh, okay.
And originally, so in this period of the show, the episodes have individual titles. So like episode 3 is called The Airlock, and episode 1 is called 400 Dawns. And there is no episode titled Galaxy 4. That's a title applied to the storyline in hindsight.
Oh.
And the only reference to Galaxy 4 is the Drahvens say that's where they're from.
So it's weird that was chosen presumably by the BBC at a later point to represent this story.
Of course, a lot of times what they would do is they take these stories and novelize them, and maybe that was whoever was the script, the writer or the editor of the novels, the one that chose that title, and it just kind of stuck with the story.
Right, Doctor Who in the Galaxy 4 or whatever they called it. Yeah, this planet, is interesting. The Doctor says a planet perfectly conducive to life, but without any,
except there are plants in the view screen that you can see. It's like those are alive.
Yeah, so maybe he means higher life,
animal life.
Right. That's
Vicky actually goes up and smells the flowers.
But have you learned nothing yet? Because that was my first impression was this isn't suspicious to any of you. This seems suspicious to me. And Jimmy, I like how you noticed that the Chumbleys are basically Roombas. They're just like blindly nosing around, bumping into things because they don't have visual receptors of any sort, cameras.
They apparently have infrared ones, so they've got like FLIR systems, and you'd think, why don't you use that to navigate?
Yes. Because they navigate by sound, I think they say early. Although later on they kind of
sound and touch.
Yeah, they kind of move away from that a bit. But at one point, Vicky and the Doctor kind of follow one of these in a quote unquote blind spot. Like they just sneak behind it as they follow it to wherever it's going. They do get rescued from the machines, quote unquote rescued, because later on we learn they actually weren't in danger from them, but they get rescued by one of the Drahvens, and who acts very robotic herself, as we mentioned. Like they are very robotic and not very human.
Disciplined.
Yeah.
Incidentally, one thing that I noticed about this is, so at this point in the show's history, both of the Doctor's companions are from the future, because Steven's from the future. Vicky's from even a little further in the future than Steven is. I mean, Steven was a spaceship pilot. And the Doctor is from a even more technologically advanced civilization. So all three of our protagonists are from technologically advanced civilizations that are in advance of the 20th century. And so we didn't have lots of exposition explaining, this is a robot and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And this is a spaceship and so forth. In fact, all three of them are like commenting on how rickety the Drahvan spaceship looks like and how it's made from inferior materials and stuff. And I thought that was such an interesting dynamic of having three future-oriented characters with nobody from the past like Jamie or Victoria, and nobody from 21st century London. It's like, thank you. This is such a refreshing change.
Yeah.
Right. They when they meet with the Drahvens and Maga, and which as a 21st century American, the name Maga raises all sorts of interesting new connotations. But she does act like sort of a dictatorial figure. The Doctor makes a good point that
not based on stereotypes.
Sorry,
not
stereotypes.
actual commenting on any current American situation.
I'm not making any political commentary.
It was spelled differently. So
yeah. Okay. I didn't. Yeah. I was listening.
MAAGA.
Gotcha. So it's just interesting how stuff produced a long time ago can have new connotations based on completely unrelated things, just as time has changed. The doctor makes a good point that they have no reason to trust the Drahvens over anyone else, except that Steven thinks that they're attractive. So there's kind of this, like, he's making that point that don't just trust somebody because they look attractive or interesting or friendly or whatever. When you're out here in the the great wild of the universe and all of space and time, you got to go deeper. You got to look deeper. And I think the first doctor sometimes can be a little bit bumbling, but in this one, I felt like he was a little bit more, apart from almost killing all the Rills with the tampering with the machine. He was a little bit more on the ball than we've seen him at other points, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, he is. He's clearly analytical. He's not automatically trusting or distrusting of anybody, either the Rills or the Drahvens. He's very neutral.
Well, and it's funny, at the beginning of the episode, he talks about how they're on a scientific expedition, that they're traveling around in the TARDIS, not because the TARDIS is just taking where the TARDIS wants to take them, but because they're on a scientific expedition to, and that they're scientists. And they bring that up several times. They're scientists in this, which is not really stuff we hear from the Doctor very often, at least at this point, that he's there as a scientist.
There's also an interesting line in, because it's established in An Unearthly Child in the very first episode that Susan came up with the name TARDIS based on time and relative dimension in space. And so that would sound like the Doctor is an inventor who came up with this ship, and then his granddaughter named it. And in this episode, there is a line where Stephen and the Doctor are going back to the TARDIS, and at this point they don't realize that Chumblies are not a threat because they haven't talked to the Rills yet. And there's been a Chumbly, trying to get into the TARDIS previously, and the Doctor is like, oh, don't worry about it, Stephen, it's not going to be able to get in. And they get there, and it has not gotten in. And the Doctor says, I certainly excelled myself with that force barrier around the TARDIS, making it sound like, again, he invented the TARDIS. And that is later disconfirmed. You can still reconcile it. You can still say, oh, he was the one that erected the force barrier around this TARDIS. But it's an interesting artifact of the writing of the show based on the initial assumptions that the Doctor was like an inventor or something.
Yeah, it's interesting to me how they use the word scientist in this era of, on Doctor Who, because it almost like explorer would be the more, like, the scientist is this generic cover term that covers all kinds of science. Like, it kind of almost goes back to the days of the natural philosopher, where you could be a scientist of everything, and that's kind of how the Doctor is in these early days. He's a scientist of everything.
And the term was still new. For centuries, what we today would call a scientist was called a natural philosopher. That's why physicists get PhDs, doctorates of philosophy. And science was just called natural philosophy. It wasn't until the mid to late 19th century that the term scientist was really applied in the modern sense of, this is a person who specializes in the natural sciences. And so the term was still new. It was less, than 100 years old. And of course, in the mid 20th century, science was the big thing. So we are scientists.
And science would save us all and solve all problems.
Kind of interesting that the Doctor, being shown as creating the TARDIS, or at least implying that he's created parts of the TARDIS, that actually gets used in the Peter Cushing movies. That he actually is the creator of the TARDIS, where he's a human being who created the TARDIS instead of from an alien race, of course, as we know later on in Doctor Who and all that.
They where Peter Cushing is portrayed as an inventor who has come up with the TARDIS. And they don't actually say he's a human. A lot of people assume that because he's living on Earth. And they've kind of, Stephen Moffat had a retcon of those films are actual films in the Doctor Who universe with Peter Cushing playing the Doctor. I don't buy that. It's the Doctor in another timeline.
There you go.
And he's just, I don't know, at most under influence of a chameleon watch or something. But the science the Doctor has is not particularly great in this episode. He says that when they're a little unclear to my mind on why the planet is going to explode. It seems to have to do with its orbit with respect to the suns or something maybe, but they're not really clear about that. He is able to calculate more precisely than the Rills exactly when it's going to explode, and it's closer than what the Rills think. The Rills think they've got 14 days or 14 dawns. The Doctor says it's really only going to be 2. But then he says it's going to explode into hydrogen gas. Not unless every atom on the planet experiences nuclear fission. No, it's not. It might break up or explode, but that's not going to turn the atoms into hydrogen.
Right. Release hydrogen gas, maybe? At best. Like there's like a big pocket of hydrogen gas in it somewhere. But yeah.
And then in the last scene where the planet's breaking up, we see lava bubbling up and the Drahvens fall into it. And it's like, I don't think so.
So when the Doctor at one point, they've been captured by the Drahvens. They're in their ship. They're being interrogated. Maga threatens to kill Vicky for the truth because the Doctor's withholding some knowledge from her. And I'm like, I was watching this going, he could say anything. Like, she has no way to judge the veracity of whatever he says at this point. How would she know? Like, I forget exactly what it was. She was something to do with the Rills. And it's like, he could say anything at this point.
It's how long it's going to be before the planet blows up.
Okay, that's what it was. Yeah. And it's like, it's just that it's sort of typical writing of this sort of thing. Like, just like when you, like interrogations in TV shows, like either they're torturing or holding someone, but so often there's no way to verify the veracity of the knowledge that you're extracting, and therefore it's a kind of a completely useless tactic. I just thought it was kind of funny to see it here in this one. So the Maga, there's a scene where we talked about the Rills self-sacrifice. There is a scene at one point where Maga and the Drahvens are marveling that humans, the Doctor and Vicky and Stephen, will help one another and even die for one another, and that they have no understanding or knowledge of that in their species, in their culture and society, which is kind of interesting. And it made me think: can a society exist without any self-sacrifice or love or help or aid? The desire, that selfless help for other people, can that even exist?
Well, it can. I mean, you could have a society, in principle, it's not a human society, not a developed one, but human societies exist along a spectrum where there can be a shift in the amount of altruism in the society. But you can imagine a society that is shifted way towards self-interest. And so it's like, I'll cooperate with you because it's in my self-interest to do so, but that's all I'm doing. And so you could have a society that's very much every man for himself. We are cooperating, but it's purely out of self-interest. There's no real altruism here.
And frankly, a lot of dictator type governments basically operate on that is, yes, I'm going to work with the dictator because I want to live. Not because I care about him in most cases or want to, advance his career. No, it's, I want to survive. I don't want to be taken out and face a firing squad.
Right. Or interpersonally, even just, I'm not going to help other people just out of the goodness of my heart, but only because it helps me survive or advance or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. It's being a psychopath, lack of empathy.
Right.
There is an interesting moment in kind of later in the series where Maga is humanized a bit because she's alone with her juniors, and there are 3 juniors. They don't even have names. They're just Drahvens 1, 2, and 3. Mm-hmm. And those are their designations. This is like 7 of 9.
Yeah.
One of them makes a comment, "Oh, we could do this like 3 did."
Yeah.
And there originally was a 4th who we get to see only in a flashback. 4 was wounded, and so Maga killed her, but then lied to 1, 2, and 3, telling them that it was the Rills that killed her. Apparently, in their culture, and I think this is a potential writing stumble, apparently in their culture, it's policy to kill the wounded. Mm-hmm. So then why would she lie about the Rills doing it? You know, you could have just said, "Oh, she was wounded, I killed her." But there was this 4th, but then there's this moment later on where Maga is philosophical, and she's reflecting on her situation and how the leaders of her planet told her to go out and conquer space, and if you're going to conquer space, you're going to need soldiers, so we're sending these 4 soldiers with you. But the soldiers are bred for limited intelligence, and they don't adapt well to change. And and she's sensing the inadequacy of what she's been tasked to do and the staff that she's been given to do it with. She wants people who are able to think more creatively. And I don't know exactly what she wants, whether she wants farmers or scientists or what, but she's sensing that the soldiers she's been given are not really what she needs to go out and conquer space and establish a colony and things like that. And it's interesting. It's nice to see her reflecting critically on her own society and its leadership and acknowledging that they don't always make the best decisions, and she's kind of stuck with the results.
Yeah. You know, another interesting aspect of her was also the multiple times when she was given an option to survive, just compromise, just accept the Rills as, you know, their hand of friendship, or even the doctor could have
tentacle of friendship, as it may be.
It may be. Or even the doctor could have invited them onto the TARDIS and taken them away. But just the obstinacy, the inability, the lack of any type of flexibility in saying, "Hey, maybe we should do something different. Maybe we should go with them and survive." But no, it was always, the only way to survive is to conquer the others. The only way I can succeed is if someone else is defeated. And in the end, that's, you know, what leaves them dead in space on this planet.
I thought that's something they could have tied up a little bit better than they did, because at the end of episode 4, the Doctor has jump-started the Rill ship, and the Rill ship takes off. And there's this other structure that the Rills have built, I guess, adjacent to their spaceship that they leave behind. And so now that the Rills are gone, the Doctor, Vicky, and Steven run back to the TARDIS. The Drahvens are pursuing them, and they get into the TARDIS. Steven opens the door momentarily to throw out the Rill jumper cable so that the door will close properly. And he shuts the door on them, and they dematerialize. And it's like there is no effort made to save the Rills. And I was thinking, this would not happen in modern Who without some additional setup. And they could have addressed it a number of ways. The Doctor could have made a last-minute offer and even saved them. Or the Doctor could have made a last-minute offer and the Drahvens rejected it, or, you know, indicated they wouldn't go along with the Doctor's plan. And so he says, "Sorry, I'm out of here then." At least I thought they could have had a couple of lines of dialogue of discussion, like Steven or Vicky could say, "Doctor, why don't we take them in the TARDIS with us?" And he says, "My child, look at what they just tried to do to the Rills. They offered them free passage on their starship, and their ideology determined they could not accept help. They have to try to take over whatever type of ship they're going to do. It would not be safe. We're outnumbered, and they have weapons. It would not be safe for us to bring them aboard the TARDIS.
Yeah, it seemed cold.
It seemed really cold. Yeah,
that's sort of.
And earlier in the story, there's a moment where Maga is having a little fantasy about watching. I mean, it's just Drahvens present. She's not doing this in front of the humans or the Rills, but she's having a little fantasy about, we're going to get back up into space in the Rill spaceship, and we're going to look on the planet and watch it explode. It's going to be a brilliant white light. And the humans and the Rills will be down on the planet dying. And the one of the underlings makes a comment indicating her limited intelligence, and Maga says, but at least I have the intelligence to envision it. Just imagine there being there as the planet is shuddering and dying and you're trapped and so forth. And then we get to watch Maga in that situation. Where after the TARDIS takes off, she and her aide are still down on the surface. The ground is developing cracks. It's splitting open. Lava is bubbling up, and we get to watch Maga be in the exact situation she fantasized about.
Yep.
Well, it's interesting that there is one point when I think it was Steven was trying to reason with one of the Drahvan soldiers. And she was actually showing, logical thought process and all this stuff. And Maga's the one who supposedly thinks, but a lot of times doesn't show the logical thought process. Just, I must kill the enemy. You are my enemy, therefore I must kill you. Or I can use you to, like Steven or Vicky, to get what I want. And so you will stay here with me and I will kill you if you try to escape. That there really isn't a logical, okay, maybe these people are right. Maybe the Rills are actually peaceful and can get us home. But they're different than us. And so I can't use any other kind of thought process like that.
As if the Drahvan soldiers maybe weren't as dumb as we were led to believe and that they were made to believe. Yeah, true. So any final notes or thoughts on this episode, Father Cory?
Nothing here.
Jimmy?
I thought Vicky showed remarkable empathy for a Roomba vacuum cleaner because at the end, the Rills say, we're going to send a Chumbly with you to take you back to the TARDIS and protect you on the way there. And then the Chumbly will shut itself down and it'll perish with the planet. And Vicky is like, and it will be completely painless. Don't worry. And like, Vicky, you're from the future. This is a vacuum cleaner.
Right.
Don't worry about it.
And not nearly as much empathy for the Drahvens, I noticed. Yep. So, all right, great. Well, that will do it for this discussion. We would like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Doctor Who, including a number of patrons who I didn't list here, but I wanted to take a moment to thank them for their generous donations at sqpn.com/give, which makes it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Doctor Who in all the shows at StarQuest. And you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. We'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edited this episode. So what did you think of Galaxy 4, this first Doctor story? You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page. Send an email to drwho@sqpn.com. Visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. You can watch the Secrets of Doctor Who on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia and leave a comment there. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the 12th Doctor story, Under the Lake. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Doctor Who.
Thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Thanks, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest, and remember, it's got a sort of Chumbly movement.